877-3DP Show. He's a Hall of Famer. He's Al Michaels, Thursday Night Football, play-by-play on Amazon. Al, great to see you again. How's morale?
I'm so happy to fill this window of opportunity for you. As always, it's so funny. You mentioned Bob Uecker, and I know when you promoted the fact I was going to be on the show, you called me Albino. But that was the name Dennis Miller gave to me. I much prefer Alfalfa, which is the name Bob Uecker gave to me in 1982 and was stolen by Howard Cosell.
God, you go back to Uecker and the Miller Lite commercials and how when he was on with Johnny Carson, and like he was killing it when he was on with Carson.
I think Johnny Carson actually said at one point, maybe he wrote about it in a book, that he put Uecker, I think, in the top 5 of the people he loved to interview. I think Don Rickles would be in there too. I mean, Don Rickles is clearly the funniest man I have ever met. And Bob Uecker, I mean, he's right in that pantheon. I mean, Uecker would come, I think I've told you this story before, but I was doing a game with Uecker and Cosell in the early 80s. And, Howard wanted a bunt in a situation where you'd never bunt. And Uecker's trying to talk him off of it, but, very softly and kindly. And now Howard's going to play with him again. And he says, all right, Uecker, you don't have to be so truculent. You do know what truculent means, don't you? And without hesitation, Uecker says, Howard, of course. If you had a truck and I borrowed it, it would be a truculent. And I mean, not only was Uecker funny, but Uecker was quick. He was, somebody would say something and a second later, bango.
I love that he said, catching a knuckleball's easy. You just wait till it stops rolling.
Right. And also, I mean, he had so many great lines. There was a $5,000 bonus that was offered when he signed. He said, well, my father couldn't afford that much. So I love Bob Uecker. I just love the guy.
Did you ever meet Johnny Carson?
I met him very briefly at a restaurant. I was never on his show. No. Would have loved it at that point, but I know that our good buddy Bob Costas, one of his the things that he wanted to do before his career was over, to get on the Carson show, and I think he did that last week. But no, I just met him once in a restaurant. End of story.
All right, let me set up the premise because we thought of you, the most greatest player in sports history. So we created a new phrase here, the most greatest players, because we were talking about Wayne Gretzky. When you look at dominance in your sport, 8 Hart trophies. I mean, what he did is Ruthian in his sport. But if you were going to give me your top 5 most greatest players in sports history, depending on whatever sport you want to pick.
Well, it's funny because ESPN at the end of the 20th century, 1999, they did the 30 for 30, and they picked the top 100 athletes of the 20th century. And I was on a panel, and you had to pick them 1 through 100. It was hard because, there were so many. I actually went with Jim Thorpe because there was no television, start of the century, multiple Olympic medalist, gold medalist, played professional baseball, played professional football. But, pre-television age, radio was still in its infancy. But you're right about, now you mentioned the 2 people who I thought about too, Babe Ruth, who, of course, would, one year, I think 1921, he had 59 home runs to lead the league. The next guy hit something like 24. So it was, pretty much like Gretzky. Wayne was the same way. Wayne would lead in goals by a margin of 2.5 to 1. So I put, Wayne in there, Ruth, certainly. Now you get to basketball and so many, I go back when I was in high school, I saw Elgin Baylor play. Elgin Baylor was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. The game was played so differently at that point. So you had Michael. I love, living in LA, I saw a ton of Kobe. And I mean, I got to put Kobe right up there next to Michael. You can argue that till your death as to who was the better guy. Everybody, for the most part, would say Michael, but they were both off the charts fantastic. I think for football, there were so many great quarterbacks, but for my football player, believe it or not, I put in Jerry Rice, because Rice did that same thing to the record book that Gretzky and Ruth did. Mm-hmm. He was so much better than everybody at that particular time. And while we're on the subject of Gretzky, I have to say something to you, Dan, because a lot of people obviously don't follow hockey, but as a hockey maniac, Connor McDavid of the Edmonton Oilers, without question, the best player I've seen since Wayne. And I know it's heresy to say, is he better than Wayne? Wow. But I ran into Grant Fuhrer, who was the goalie on those Edmonton teams in the 80s, so he would know. And I said to Grant, it's heresy. Is McDavid better than Gretzky? He had a great answer. He said, not yet.
Oh, wow.
He said Wayne made everybody around him better. But McDavid is, I love, I watch Edmonton on the NHL Plus, whatever it is, network, just to see him play. Anyway, so there you would have me. And then if you're only talking about teams, you're eliminating like boxers. I think Muhammad Ali actually won that thing, by the way, if memory serves.
No, Jordan won it.
Did Jordan win it? And where did Ali finish? He had to finish in the top 3 or so.
I think Secretariat was up there.
Wow.
Yes. And
I forgot that.
People were so upset because I hosted that. Each week I'd reveal, who was number 17. And I remember when we revealed that Secretariat was one of the top 50 athletes of all time. People went through the roof. Paulie, you have the top 5?
Yeah, the top 5 ESPN's greatest North American athletes. Michael Jordan, Babe Ruth, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Wayne Gretzky. Then it goes to Jesse Owens, Jim Thorpe, etc.
I would put Jackie Robinson there. I think Jackie is the greatest athlete of all time for this reason. I'm going to add importance there. What he went through to do what he was doing. Baseball wasn't his best sport. He could have played football. He played football at UCLA, ran track. Right. So he was also a basketball player at UCLA. So if I look at all 4 sports that he might have been able to play professionally, and by the way, you played in baseball, you broke the color barrier, you had teammates who didn't even want you on the field at that time, and you became a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's no question as to the importance of Jackie Robinson and what he meant. But again, you go into this barroom argument. And by the way, why is it called a barroom? You ever say, we got to meet you in the barroom, right? We're going to meet you in the bar, right?
Yeah.
I always love that phrase, barroom argument.
And it's a barroom brawl.
It's a barroom brawl, right?
Yes.
Except for a bar brawl.
Yeah.
Where did that start? Yeah, I mean, in terms of significance and what he's meant to sports and what he meant to, sports intertwined with society and a lot of everything else, Robinson is there. But then again, somebody's got to be number one. So pick your number one. And Jordan's a good answer.
Yeah, I remember we were trying to get him to do an interview. And this is right up to the very end. We're trying to get Jordan to sit down and do an interview. They want to put together his moment, and Mike didn't want to do it. And I remember at the time, Tim Duncan was playing in the NBA Finals, and he wanted to know who was going to be the number 1 person. He gets done. He just beat the Knicks. He comes into the interview room because I said, look, if you win the NBA title, I'll tell you. He just won the title. He walks in, he goes, who's number 1? And I go, well, you guys are. He goes, no, who's number 1? And I said, Michael Jordan. And then he goes, okay. Like that, for some reason, he really wanted to know. But Mike doesn't like reflecting back. He doesn't do a lot of these interviews. I mean, he did The Last Dance, and I think The Last Dance felt like it was a reminder to those who think LeBron or Kobe, these other modern-day players, are on his level. I think that's part of the reason why he did that documentary.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think he knew at that point, because, I mean, nobody really knew that they were doing that. And their behind-the-scenes footage and the audio was, you watched it and went, wow, where'd they get that? How'd they do that? So he knew what he had in mind for maybe his legacy. But you're right. He did very few interviews, as did Kobe. Kobe didn't do that many interviews either during that period of time. So they were very selective.
He's Al Michaels, the Hall of Famer. Do you remember your first NFL game that you called?
I certainly do. So I'm doing the Cincinnati Reds during the baseball season. And then NBC called me in 1971, my first year at Cincinnati. and said, "Can you do a regional NFL game on October 3rd, 1971? We want you to go to Minnesota and do Buffalo against Minnesota." And in those years, the home team was blacked out, so it wasn't even shown in Minneapolis. It only went to Buffalo. It's during the baseball playoffs, which was why I got the job, because Kurt Gowdy and Jim Simpson were doing the playoffs that year. So Jay Randolph moved to number one, and I came in to do the last game. So not only does it only go to Buffalo, it doesn't even go to the regular NBC station. It goes to a UHF station in Buffalo. So Minnesota wins the game 19-0. Bud Grant was the coach. And in that game, O.J. Simpson was the running back, and Al Cowlings was the defensive lineman in that game. You can look it up.
Yeah.
So that's how I broke in. And then 2 weeks later, I did the Buffalo at the Jets at Shea Stadium, same kind of thing. New York is blacked out. It's during the baseball postseason. So I go all the way back to 1971 doing my first NFL game.
Toughest sport, or how about the easiest sport to do play-by-play in?
The easiest? Well, I built my career around baseball, so it was so comfortable. And it's a different sport to do, obviously. You have some time. It's more relaxing and all. So, I mean, baseball was easy for me. And then a ton of football. I've done 900 NFL games now and probably a couple hundred college games. So, I get how to do football. Hockey is the hardest. Without question, hockey on radio is the hardest, because if you're in your car, you can picture a baseball game. This team's at bat, this team's in the field. In football, this team has the ball, this team is on defense. In basketball, even though a lot of turnovers, who has the ball. In hockey, the change of possession is so quick and so rapid. And people, you don't get to see, like, if you're a fan of the Rangers, but they're playing Winnipeg, you know who your guys are. You have no idea who the other guys are. So I think, guys who do hockey on radio very well have a great deal of respect for me, because I think it's the toughest.
How's your eyesight?
My eyesight is pretty good. I wear a daily contact lens in my right eye.
But you have to have good eyesight to do play-by-play, don't you?
You do. Oh, for sure. But again, these days, the coverage is so great that I think very often you're calling the game off the monitor, because you can see the game a lot better off the monitor than you can if you're sitting, high up. I mean, some of the broadcast vantage points are great, like Kansas City, even New York. You're kind of like right over the field and you feel like you're right there. And then you get to other places where you're like in the top of the upper deck. I remember Candlestick Park when the 49ers played there. The football broadcast booth was so high. I once said, I couldn't resist I said, you're actually looking down on the blimp. I mean, it was ridiculous. So you had to call the game off the monitor in those years. I try to do it both ways. I try to, watch how they're lined up with my naked eye, see how the play begins. Then you go to the monitor, because you're going to see it a lot better off the monitor.
Yeah, I always admired what Doc Emmerich did to
tremendous.
But to do it on TV where it's so fast paced, but you don't have to describe all the action, because you want to be fair to the audience that you don't say everything that you see. But when it comes to radio, and that's the tricky part of, you can see it, I don't have to say it, but what am I going to say to kind of complement what you're watching? How difficult was that for you at any time?
Yeah, well, I didn't do that much hockey, but
well, any sport though, like we get to see, and you assume your audience is knowledgeable, and then how much do you tell them what they're actually seeing?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's a difference between announcing a football game on television and on radio. On radio, you need to use every verb. Nobody can see anything. Mm-hmm. On television, I talk about very often using captions and ellipses. You see the play. You don't have to necessarily use the verb, because the verb becomes a visual to the fan. So in football, and same thing basically in baseball. and roughly the same in basketball. Hockey is a different animal because in hockey, and Doc Emmerich had it down perfectly. He almost did a radio call on television. Not exactly, but you want to keep up with the pace. The pace of the game is so fast and back and forth and change of possession and almost scoring. So hockey would be the closest to combining radio with television. The other sports are vastly different.
Would you rather be great or entertaining?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, Dan.
Well,
I really do.
Let's say you could be Vince Carter.
Yep.
Or Tim Duncan.
Good question. I'd like to be a hybrid.
That's not an answer, Al.
No, who had the better career? I mean,
Tim.
Yeah, for sure. No question about it. And it's funny because who reminded me of Tim? Pete Sampras. And I remember once after Pete retired, and Pete lives out here, and I played a lot of golf with him through the years. And we were walking down the fairway at one point, a couple of years after he retired, and he was a little worried about becoming not as relevant in retirement. And I said to him, "You remind me of Tim Duncan. I think you'll only be appreciated to the fullest extent after you're gone." And they were the same kind of people, right? Not necessarily gregarious, obviously, or entertaining, but tremendous.
You didn't answer the question. Al, you didn't answer the question.
Vince Carter or Duncan. What can I tell you? Yeah, Duncan won championships and all that. Vince was great to watch. But, Duncan, I mean, what are you playing the game for? You're playing the game to win the game. And, look at Duncan's record. Unbelievable.
Great to talk to you. So, hopefully we didn't, slow down your golf game today.
Listen, I have to tell you one thing. The last golf tip you gave me.
Johnny Miller. So it worked for about 3 holes. But Dan, the problem right now is when I try to put that in my head, what I do is I go, Johnny Miller. Johnny Miller. Slow down your swing. Yes.
Johnny Miller. I know. It's like,
thank you, Al.
All right.
Great to talk to you, buddy.
Dan, I'll be a good fan.
That's Al Michaels, the great Al Michaels. Take a break. Last call for phone calls, what we learned. Also, rhyme time with Todd. We'll squeeze that in. Back after this.